The city was alive with lights and noise, but the narrow side streets were dark and wet from the evening rain. Daniel walked with his hands in his coat pockets, his boots splashing in small puddles. He had just finished another long day of work. At the cargo docks, his muscles aching from lifting crates. The cold wind slipped through his jacket, making him shiver. He was thinking only of getting home, making a hot drink, and resting. But then he felt something. It wasn't a sound at first, more like the feeling of eyes on his back. Daniel slowed his pace, the sound of his own steps echoing in the narrow alley. Somewhere behind him, another set of footsteps followed. Light and quick. He glanced over his shoulder, but the shadows hid everything. He told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe just a stray animal. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. He turned a corner, and for a moment, the street lamp ahead flickered. When it came back on, he saw her. A small figure stood a few meters behind him, unmoving. She couldn't have been older than 8 or 9. Her skin was a pale lavender color, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her large golden eyes stared straight at him, unblinking. Water dripped from her hair, her thin clothes clinging to her small frame. Daniel stopped, unsure what to say. The girl took a step forward, her bare feet silent on the wet stones. Then, in the smallest voice he had ever heard, she whispered, "Please, human, be my dad." The words hit him like a wave, freezing him in place. He opened his mouth to speak, but she quickly looked down, as if she regretted saying it before he could respond. She added in the same trembling voice, "And my mom's husband." Daniel blinked, his mind racing. What kind of child would say something like that to a complete stranger in the middle of a dark alley? Was it some kind of trick? Was someone watching them from the shadows? The girl's small hands were clenched into fists, her shoulders shaking. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Daniel took a careful step toward her, speaking softly. "Why are you following me?" Her golden eyes met his again, and there was no mischief, there only fear and hope mixed together. "My mom. She's in trouble," the girl said, her voice breaking. "They'll take her away if she doesn't have a mate. If you marry her, the clan can't touch us." Daniel didn't know whether to laugh at the absurdity or feel the weight of her desperation. He had heard about alien clan laws before, but never imagined they could lead to this. The girl's lips trembled as she whispered again, "Please. No one else will help us." For a moment, Daniel thought about walking away. This wasn't his problem. He was just a dock worker, not a hero. But the way she was looking at him made it impossible to move. "What's your name?" Daniel asked. "Lyra," she said softly. "And your mother?" "Her name is Sira." Daniel nodded slowly, still unsure. "Where is she now?" Lyra's eyes darted toward the far end of the alley. "She's hiding." "I can take you to her, please. You have to come now, before they find us." Daniel looked around, half expecting to see someone watching them, but the alley was empty. Only the sound of distant traffic reached them. He sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. Something inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him to follow. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me." Lyra's face lit up with a flicker of relief. She turned quickly and began to lead the way, her small figure moving fast despite her thin frame. Daniel followed close behind, the rain dripping from rooftops onto his shoulders. They moved deeper into the old part of the city, where the buildings leaned together and the streets were barely lit. Lyra didn't speak again, but kept glancing back to make sure he was still there. After several turns through twisting lanes, she stopped in front of a rusted metal door. "This is it," she whispered. Daniel noticed her hand shaking as she pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of damp stone. The place was dark, except for a faint light in the corner. And there, sitting in the shadows, was a tall figure wrapped in a torn blanket. Daniel stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The figure rose slowly, and he saw her Sira. Her skin was the same pale lavender as Lyra's, but her features were sharper, her posture more guarded when she saw him. She immediately stepped between him and Lyra, her protective stance clear. Lyra quickly spoke. "Mama, it's him. The human I told you about." Syrah's eyes narrowed, studying Daniel with quiet suspicion. Her voice, low and calm, asked, "Do you understand what my daughter has asked of you?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came, because in that moment he realized this was only the beginning. For a long moment, Daniel stood in the cold room, his breath forming small clouds in the air. Syrah did not move from her place in front of Lyra, her sharp silver eyes fixed on him. The tension in the room felt like a tightrope. Ready to snap, Daniel had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different, personal, heavy. He could feel the weight of whatever had brought them to this point. Finally, Syrah spoke again, her voice low but steady. "My daughter tells me you are willing to help." Daniel hesitated, glancing at Lyra, who clutched her mother's hand tightly. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "I don't even understand what's going on." Syrah's gaze softened slightly, as if she had expected that answer. She motioned for him to sit. The three of them settled on the cold floor near a small heater that barely gave any warmth. The sound of rain tapping on the metal roof filled the silence. Then Syrah began to tell her story, her voice carrying both pride and sorrow. She and Lyra belonged to the Tavaran clan, one of the oldest alien families in the city. The clan was ruled by strict traditions that saw widows and orphans as burdens. Her husband, a miner, had died in a deep cave collapse 6 months ago. Since then, Syrah had been under constant pressure from the clan elders. They told her that without a husband, she had no claim to their protection. They said Lyra would be taken to live with another family raised as a servant until she was old enough to work. Daniel clenched his fists, the thought of someone tearing a child away from her mother burning in his mind. But Syrah wasn't done. She explained that the only way to stop the clan was to remarry, and not just to anyone. If she married another Tavaran male, the elders could still control them. But there was an old treaty between humans and her people. A Tavaran woman married a human. The clan had no legal power over her or her child. That was the loophole. That was why Lyra had been searching for anyone who could fit that role. Daniel finally understood why Lyra's strange request in the alley had carried so much desperation. But it still didn't explain one thing. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "You could have asked any human in the city." Lyra's little voice answered before her mother could speak. "Because you stopped," she said, her golden eyes locking on him. "You heard me, and you didn't walk away." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He thought back to the empty streets, the cold rain, the quiet voice behind him. Yes, he could have ignored her. Most people would have, but he hadn't, and now he was sitting here, caught in the middle of a situation that could change all their lives. Syrah watched him silently, as if trying to read his thoughts. Finally, she said, "I will not force you. Human, if you leave now, you will never see us again. But if you stay, you will have to face the clan." Her tone made it clear that facing the clan was not something to take lightly. Daniel leaned back against the wall, running a hand over his face. Part of him wanted to walk out and never look back. He had his own life, his own problems, but another part, stronger and louder, was already making the decision. He couldn't just leave them here to be taken. "What would happen if I said yes?" he asked. Syrah's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in them. "We would go to the clan leader," she explained, "in front of witnesses. You would claim us as your family. Once it is official, they cannot touch." U.S. Daniel noticed she said claim instead of marry. It wasn't a romantic proposal. This was survival. Pure and simple. Lyra leaned forward, her small hands gripping his. "Please, Daniel," she whispered. I just want my mom to be safe." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Daniel felt something shift inside him. It wasn't pity. He hated pity. It was something else, something deeper. He looked at Sierra again, seeing not just a stranger, but a mother fighting to keep her child. "All right," he said at last. "I'll help you." Lyra gasped, her eyes lighting up like twin suns. She threw her arms around him. And for the first time that night, he felt warmth. Sierra simply nodded, though he thought he saw the corner of her mouth soften into the smallest smile. "Then you must be ready," she said. "The clan will not let this happen quietly." Daniel had no idea what kind of storm he had just agreed to walk into. But as Lyra held on to him and Sierra watched with guarded hope, he knew there was no turning back. Outside, the rain began to slow, but the night still felt heavy. Somewhere in the city, word would spread quickly. By morning, the clan would know. And they would be waiting, and Daniel, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, was ready to meet them. The morning air was colder than the night before. Daniel woke up stiff from sleeping on the hard floor of the storage house. Lyra was curled up under a thin blanket beside her mother, her small breaths steady. Sierra, however, was awake, sitting near the doorway with her eyes fixed on the street outside. Her posture was tense, like a soldier expecting an attack. When Daniel moved, she glanced at him, her silver eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't stay here much longer," she said quietly. "They will find us." Her voice had no fear in it, only certainty. It made Daniel realize she had been living with this threat for months. Lyra stirred and sat up, rubbing her eyes. She smiled when she saw Daniel, as if the night before had been a dream that didn't fade. Sierra handed her a piece of stale bread, the last bit of food they had. Daniel watched them eat, noticing how Sierra gave most of her share to Lyra. It was a silent act of love, one he had seen in many struggling families on Earth. When Lyra was done, she turned to Daniel. "Today, we go to the clan leader," she said with a hopeful tone. Daniel glanced at Sierra, but she did not confirm or deny it. Instead, she studied him as though she was still deciding if he was truly ready. Before leaving, Sierra finally spoke in a softer voice. "There is something you must understand before we walk into their hall." Daniel waited, sensing the weight of her words. "My people respect strength above all else," she continued. "They will test you not with words, but with fear. If you show weakness, they will tear this apart before it begins." Daniel nodded, though a part of him wondered what fear meant to a warrior-like clan. Sierra's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've agreed to protect us, human. But I do not know your strength yet." It sounded almost like a challenge. Daniel met her gaze and said, "Then watch me, for a moment." The silver in her eyes seemed to soften, but only for a heartbeat. They left the storage house and walked through the maze of streets. Daniel could feel the stares of strangers on them. Some eyes were curious, some hostile. Whispers followed them like a shadow. By the time they reached the marketplace, the crowd had thickened. It was clear news had already spread. Sierra, the widow, was walking with a human in the middle of the market. A group of Tavaran males stepped into their path. The tallest one, with dark stripes along his skin, smirked. "So this is the human," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Looks soft. Will you run when the clan leader demands blood?" Daniel didn't answer, but his lack of reaction seemed to unsettle them. Sierra stepped forward, her stance protective. "We are on our way to see the leader," she said firmly. The male only laughed, but stepped aside. Still, Daniel could feel their eyes boring into his back as they walked away. When they reached the clan hall, Daniel understood why Sierra had been so cautious. The structure was massive, built from dark stone with tall archways that seemed to swallow the sunlight, too. Armored guards stood at the entrance, each holding a long spear. Their eyes followed Daniel like hunters watching prey. Sierra spoke to them in her native language, her tone sharp and commanding. Reluctantly, they allowed them to pass. Inside, the hall was colder than the outside air. The walls were decorated with ancient weapons and banners. At the far end, sitting on a raised seat carved from black stone, was the clan leader. He was taller than any Tavaran Daniel had seen, his skin a deep silver, his presence heavy like a mountain. When his eyes locked on Daniel, it felt like the air itself grew heavier. Sira led Lyra to stand behind her. She bowed slightly before speaking in a clear voice. "Leader Torvik, I have come to claim protection under the treaty with the humans." A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Torvik's eyes narrowed, shifting from Sira to Daniel. "And this," he said, gesturing at Daniel, "is your chosen mate." Daniel straightened his shoulders, meeting the leader's gaze without flinching. "Yes," he said simply. Torvik studied him for a long moment, then smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "If that is so human, then you will not mind proving it." The hall grew quiet. Sira's body stiffened, but she did not interrupt. Torvik leaned forward. "In our clan, words mean nothing if you want to claim them. You must show you can protect them." Daniel felt the eyes of every warrior in the room on him. "What kind of proof?" he asked. Torvik's smile widened. "You will face the trials," he said. "If you pass, they are yours. If you fail, they belong to the clan." Lyra gasped softly, clutching her mother's arm. Sira kept her expression unreadable, but her hand tightened on Lyra's shoulder. Daniel glanced at them, then back at Torvik. His answer came without hesitation. "Fine. I'll do it." The hall erupted in mixed laughter and murmurs. Some looked amused, others intrigued, but Torvik only nodded. "Then tomorrow at dawn, human, you will begin." As they were escorted out of the hall, Daniel could feel the weight of what he had agreed to. He didn't know what the trials were. He didn't know how brutal they might be. But one thing was clear: if he failed, Sira and Lyra would be lost to him forever. They left the clan hall in silence, the heavy doors closing behind them with a deep echo. The afternoon sun was weak, hiding behind clouds. But the streets still seemed brighter compared to the cold darkness of the hall. Lyra stayed close to Daniel's side, her small hand gripping his tightly. Sira walked ahead, her steps steady but her shoulders tense. Daniel could tell she was thinking, weighing every possibility in her mind. They turned into a quieter street, away from the eyes and whispers of the market. Finally, Sira stopped near a small fountain, the water trickling softly. She faced Daniel, her silver eyes sharp but not hostile. "You should know," she began. "The trials are not games. They are meant to break you." Daniel shrugged slightly. "I've been broken before." The corner of Sira's mouth twitched. He couldn't tell if it was almost a smile or just disbelief. Lyra looked between them, her golden eyes wide with worry. "You'll win, right?" she asked in a small voice. Daniel crouched down to meet her gaze. "I'll do everything I can," he promised. She nodded, though her lips pressed together like she was trying to be brave. Sira stepped closer, her voice lowering. "If you pass, it will mean more than protection," she said. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Sira took a breath, as if she was preparing herself for something important in the eyes of the clan. "A mate is not just a title. It means you are bound. You will not only protect us, you will be my husband and Lyra's father, by their law. It will be permanent." Daniel stared at her, the words sinking in. "You mean, if I do this? It's not just an act." Sira shook her head slowly. "There will be no way to undo it without dishonor." Her tone was calm, but there was a faint tension in her voice. She was a proud woman, and this was not something she asked lightly. Daniel leaned back slightly, processing the weight of it. He had agreed to help them, but marriage, fatherhood, those were things he had never planned for. Yet, when he glanced at Lyra, still holding on to him as if he were her lifeline, something inside him shifted. Maybe it wasn't about planning, maybe it was about doing the right thing when it mattered. Most, you could have told me this before I agreed, Daniel said quietly. Sierra met his gaze without flinching. If I had, would you still have agreed? Daniel didn't answer right away, but deep down, he already knew. Yes, he said at last. I would. Lyra's face lit up. The fear in her eyes replaced by hope. She wrapped her arms around Daniel's waist, and for a brief moment, all. The cold in the world couldn't touch him. Sierra watched them silently, her expression softening just enough for him to notice. The rest of the day passed in preparation. Sierra led them to a small, hidden home on the edge of the city, a place a friend had lent her for safety. It was nothing more than 2 rooms and a roof, but it was warmer than the storage house. While Sierra spoke with her friend in the other room, Lyra sat with Daniel and told him about the trials. They will try to scare you, she said seriously. But don't let them see it. They will make you carry heavy things, run far, maybe. Even fight. If you fall, they will laugh, but you have to get back up. Daniel listened carefully, smiling at her seriousness. You've been thinking about this a lot, he said. She nodded. I don't want to lose you. That night, the 3 of them shared a small meal together. It wasn't much, just bread and stew, but it felt like something more. For the first time, Daniel saw Sierra laugh softly at something Lyra said. It wasn't loud, and it didn't last long. But it was real. In that moment, Daniel realized that maybe this wasn't just about protection or law. Maybe this was the start of something that could feel like family. Before they slept, Sierra spoke to him one last time. When you face the trials, remember this: do not fight for yourself. Fight for her, she said, glancing at Lyra, who was already curled up under a blanket. Daniel nodded slowly. I will. The next morning came too quickly. The sound of distant drums echoed through the streets. Sit was the clan's way of announcing an event. Sierra handed Daniel a leather strap to tie around his arm. It marks you as a challenger, she explained. Her fingers brushed his skin for just a moment, and he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, trust, perhaps, or something close to it. As they stepped out into the street, the city felt different. Every eye was on them. The path to the clan hall was lined with people, some whispering, some openly mocking. But Lyra walked proudly beside him, holding his hand like it was the strongest thing in the world, and Sierra walked on his other side, her chin high. It was the first time Daniel realized that this wasn't just a challenge. It was a declaration to everyone watching. He was already standing with them, as if they were his. When they reached the hall, the gates opened wide. Inside, the leader sat waiting, and behind him, the training ground for the trials was ready. Daniel took a deep breath. Whatever happened next would decide everything, not just for him, but for the woman and child who now stood behind him, counting on him with all they had. The gates to the clan hall closed behind Daniel with a heavy thud. The air inside felt colder, as if the stone walls held the chill of every trial that had ever been fought here. The training ground stretched out before him, my wide arena surrounded by tall wooden stakes. Beyond the stakes, dozens of Tavarans stood watching, their eyes fixed on the lone human who dared to walk among them. Lyra clung to Sierra's hand in the stands, her small face tense with worry. Sierra stood tall, but Daniel could see her grip tightening. She wouldn't show fear, but she couldn't hide her concern for him. Leader Torvik rose from his seat, his voice carrying across the arena. Human, today you will face 3 trials, he announced. They will test your body, your mind, and your will. Pass them, and the woman and child are yours to protect. Fail, and they will belong to the clan. The crowd murmured in anticipation, some eager for his success, others hoping to see him fail. Daniel stepped forward, feeling the weight of every gaze on him. The first trial was already prepared wide. Pit filled with shifting stones that moved like sand under the weight of a foot. Across the pit was a narrow platform where a flag stood. His task was simple: cross, take the flag, and return. But one wrong step would mean sinking into the stones and being pulled under by the hidden mechanisms beneath. He took a deep breath and stepped into the pit. The stones shifted instantly, threatening to swallow his foot. The Tavaran warriors. Watching smiled, certain he would fall quickly. But Daniel adjusted his weight, spreading it over both feet. He remembered how to walk over unstable ground slow. Balanced, never rushing. Step by step, he moved forward. His muscles tense. Halfway across, one of the stones gave way completely, forcing him to leap to the side. Gasps rose from the crowd. Lyra bit her lips so hard she nearly drew blood. Daniel steadied himself and kept moving, his boots sliding but never losing full contact. At last, he reached the platform, grabbed the flag, and turned back. The return trip was harder, his legs ached, and the stones seemed even more unstable. But with one final push, he leaped onto solid ground, planting the flag into the earth before Torvik. The leader's eyes narrowed slightly. Trial 1. Complete, he said, his voice giving no hint of approval or disappointment. The second trial began almost immediately. 2 warriors brought out heavy sacks, each nearly as large as Daniel himself. Torvik spoke again. Carry them through the frost caves and bring them back before the torch burns out. A torch was lit and placed in a holder near the gate to the caves. Its flame would last no more than 15 minutes. Daniel hoisted the sacks onto his shoulders, the weight pressing down on him like iron. The frost caves were exactly what they sounded like: dark tunnels filled with freezing air that cut through to the bone. His breath came out in white clouds as he pushed forward, his boots crunching over ice. Each step was harder than the last. The cold stealing strength from his muscles, he could hear the faint crackle of the torch in the distance, counting down his time. By the time he returned to the arena, his arms felt like they might tear from their sockets. He dropped the sacks at Torvik's feet, his chest heaving. The torch's flame was small, but it was still alive. Another murmur swept through the crowd. Many had expected him to fail here. Torvik leaned forward, his voice colder than the frost caves. The final trial will decide everything, he said. Daniel glanced toward the stands where Lyra's eyes met his, wide and full of hope. Syrah's gaze was steady, her silver eyes holding a silent message: don't stop now. The final trial was revealed with the sound of rushing water. Warriors pulled aside a gate at the far end of the arena, exposing a wide, roaring river. The current was fast, the water dark and cold. Torvik's voice rang out. Carry them, both of them, across to the far bank. If you drop them, if you lose them to the water, you fail. Daniel's heart pounded. Syrah and Lyra stepped forward, both looking unsure. Syrah spoke quietly. You don't have to, but Daniel cut her off. Yes, I do. He knelt, letting Lyra climb onto his back. Then he lifted Syrah into his arms, feeling her weight but refusing to let it slow him. The river's edge was slippery, the sound of the current loud in his ears. He stepped in, the icy water hitting him like a wall. Each step was a battle against the current. The water rose to his waist, then his chest. Lyra's small arms tightened around his neck. Syrah's hands gripped his shoulders, her breath steady against his ear. Halfway across, the current surged, nearly pulling him under. The crowd gasped, warriors leaning forward to watch. Daniel dug his boots into the riverbed and pushed forward. His muscles burned. His lungs screamed for air, but step by step, he moved until his feet found solid ground on the far bank. When he stepped out of the water, dripping and shivering, but still holding them, a roar of shock spread through the crowd. He had done it. He hadn't just passed. He had carried them through every challenge without faltering. Torvik stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "The trials are complete," he said, and though his tone was neutral, the law was clear. Daniel had earned them. The crowd's noise slowly faded into a tense silence. Daniel stood on the far bank of the river, water dripping from his clothes, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Lyra slid down from his back and ran to Syrah's side, her little face glowing with pride. Syrah remained still for a moment, her silver eyes fixed on Daniel. There was no smile. But there was something else: respect, maybe even trust. She had seen men fall apart under less pressure. This human had carried them both across the worst of it without a single step of surrender. 2 warriors crossed the bridge to lead Daniel back to war, the center of the arena. The river trial was over. But Torvik had not yet spoken the final words. Daniel could feel that something was still hanging in the air. The leader rose from his black stone seat, his tall figure casting a shadow that reached almost to where Daniel stood. "You have completed the trials," Torvik said slowly, his voice echoing through the arena. "By our law, they are now yours to protect. But law is not everything. The people must see you as worthy." Murmurs rose from the crowd. Daniel frowned, realizing the real test might not have been the trials at all. Torvik stepped down from his seat and walked toward him, each step deliberate. "You have strength, human." The leader continued, "But strength alone cannot hold a family together. If your will is weak, you will fail them." Torvik stopped a few feet away, his silver eyes narrowing. "In our ways, there is one final proof," he said. He turned and gestured for Syrah to step forward. She moved with measured grace, her face calm, though her heart beat faster. Torvik looked between them. "You must speak your choice before all," he said. "Say it now, so every voice in this hall will. Remember, do you take this woman and her child as your own? Do you swear to protect them until your life ends?" The question wasn't just for Daniel, it was a challenge in front of the entire clan. If he hesitated, even for a second, the crowd would see weakness. Daniel didn't break eye contact. "I do," he said, his voice steady. "I will protect them for as long as I live." A few in the crowd laughed, others muttered, but many stayed quiet, watching closely. Torvik's gaze shifted to Syrah. "And you," he said, "do you accept this human as your mate and father to your child?" The silence stretched for a heartbeat too long. Syrah's silver eyes flicked toward Lyra, who was staring at her with hope shining bright. She took a slow breath. "I do," she said, her voice clear. "I accept him." A ripple moved through the crowd, approval from some, disbelief from others. Torvik studied them both for a moment, then nodded once. "It is done," he announced. He turned to face the crowd, raising his voice. "By the trials and by their words, they are bound. No hand may harm them without facing my wrath." The sound of a deep drum filled the air, the clan's way of sealing the decision. Some warriors bowed their heads slightly in respect, while others turned away in frustration, but none could deny the outcome. Lyra ran to Daniel, hugging him tightly around the waist. "You did it," she said, her voice bubbling with relief. Daniel knelt down, his arms wrapping around her small frame. "I told you I'd do everything I could," he murmured. Syrah stood beside them, her posture still formal, but the tension in her shoulders had lessened. Torvik stepped closer one last time. "You have earned this, human. But remember, you fail them, you will answer to me." Daniel met his gaze without fear. "I don't plan on failing," he said. Torvik gave the faintest nod before turning back to his seat. The ceremony ended, and the arena slowly emptied. The cold air outside felt almost warm compared to the weight of the trials. As they walked through the streets, people watched them, some with respect, others with suspicion, but Daniel didn't care. Lyra held one of his hands, Syrah walked on his other side, and for the first time since he had met them, they didn't look like people running from danger. They looked like a family walking home when they reached the small, borrowed house. Lyra rushed inside ahead of them. Sierra lingered at the door, her gaze on Daniel. "You didn't have to agree to that final vow so quickly," she said quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes, I did." She studied him for a moment, as if searching for the truth in his face. Finally, she nodded. "Then I will do my part as well," she said, her voice softer than before. That night, the sound of rain returned. But inside the house, it was warm. Lyra fell asleep, curled up on a blanket, holding a small carved toy Daniel had bought her on the way back. Sierra sat across from him at the small table, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. "Tomorrow, they will test you again," she said, not with trials, but with eyes everywhere. "We go. They will watch to see if you mean what you said." Daniel nodded. "Let them watch," he replied. Because deep down, he already knew he hadn't just passed their test, he had passed his own. Asterisk, asterisk. Morning sunlight crept into the small house, casting a soft, golden glow across the worn wooden floor. Daniel woke to the sound of quiet laughter. He turned his head to see Lyra trying to braid her mother's hair, her small fingers working clumsily. But with determination, Sierra sat patiently, her silver eyes glancing at Daniel when she noticed he was awake. For the first time since he had met her, there was no trace of tension in her face, only calm. Lyra noticed him watching and grinned. "You sleep like a rock," she teased. Daniel chuckled, rubbing his eyes. "And you wake up too early." She giggled and went back to her braiding, her voice humming a tune Daniel didn't know. It was a scene so peaceful, so normal, that it almost made him forget the trials and the cold stares from the day before. After breakfast, just warm bread and tea, they decided to walk through the market. Sierra hesitated at first, but Daniel insisted. "We can't hide forever," he said. Lyra walked between them, holding both their hands, her steps light with joy. The market was busier than usual, and the moment they arrived, whispers began. Some vendors looked at them with curiosity, others with quiet disapproval, but none dared speak openly. One older Tavaran woman stepped forward, her eyes on Lyra. "She looks happier." The woman said to Sierra, "Perhaps you made the right choice." It was a small comment, but Sierra's posture straightened, and Daniel saw a faint pride in her eyes. They bought fresh fruit, bread, and even a little sweet cake for Lyra, who ate it in small bites to make it last. Daniel carried most of the goods, ignoring the stares. At one point, a group of young warriors passed by, their expressions unreadable. One of them stopped, meeting Daniel's eyes for a moment, then gave a short nod before walking on. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it wasn't hostility either. What? Acknowledgement. Daniel knew that was the first step to being accepted. In the afternoon, they returned home. Sarah began preparing food while Daniel sat outside, repairing a broken stool he had found in the corner of the house. Lyra sat beside him, watching his hands work. "Do you like being here?" she asked suddenly. Daniel looked at her and smiled. "I like being with you." Her eyes lit up at the answer, and she leaned against his arm. "I'm glad you're my dad now," she said softly. Those words hit Daniel harder than any trial, because they weren't spoken out of need, but out of choice. When evening came, they shared dinner together, the air filled with quiet conversation and the occasional laugh. Sierra surprised him by asking about his life before they met. He told them about Earth, the docks, and the quiet evenings he used to spend alone. It was peaceful, but empty, he admitted. Now, it's different. Sierra listened without interrupting, her gaze steady but softer than before. Later that night, as Lyra drifted off to sleep, Daniel stepped outside to look at the stars. Sierra joined him a moment later, standing beside him in The cool night air, they will still test you, she said, not with trials, but with their eyes and their judgment. Daniel nodded. I know. She glanced at him. Why do you keep choosing to stay, human? You could have walked away any time. He thought about it for a moment before answering. Because the moment I saw Lyra standing in that alley, I knew walking away would haunt me forever, he said. And because somewhere between the first step and the last trial, you stopped being strangers to me. For a moment, Sira didn't reply. Then she said quietly, we are not used to trust. But I will try. Daniel turned to her. That's all I ask. The next morning, word spread that the clan council had officially entered his name into their records. It was no longer just an agreement made in front of Torvikits's law. Daniel was now recognized as Sira's husband and Lyra's father in every sense. When Sira told him, she looked directly into his eyes and said, this is not just survival anymore. It is our life. Days turned into weeks. The market stares grew fewer. The whispers softened. Some neighbors even greeted them in passing. Lyra began laughing more freely, running through the streets with other children, always returning to Daniel and Sira like it was the most natural thing in the world. At night, the three of them shared stories. And Daniel learned more about Tavaran customs. Sira learned about human ways, sometimes shaking her head at the oddities, sometimes laughing one evening as they sat together under the warm light of the small house. Lyra suddenly spoke. You know, the first time I saw you, I thought you wouldn't even stop to listen, she said to Daniel, but you did. Daniel smiled and ruffled her hair. And look where that got me. Where? She asked, tilting her head. He looked between her and Sira, right where I belong. He said. Sira didn't speak. But the way her hand rested gently on his for the rest of the evening said more than words could. The trials were over. The danger was behind them for now. But the real victory wasn't in the challenges he had passed. It was in the quiet moments like this, moments that proved they were no longer three separate lives. They were a family, born out of desperation, held together by choice and ready to face whatever came next. Asterisk.